it was almost better having a house in the 60s than it is in the 2020s nowadays. And the old builders, this is what they used to say actually, talking back to my apprenticeship, they're like, well, I don't know why we're putting this foam around the windows and, doing all this stuff. They're like, the house needs to breathe. And in your mind, you're like, breathe, yeah, but that's just letting cold air in. Like, that's ridiculous. But they had a point, right?
Clima inspires and educates people to create healthy, durable and energy-efficient buildings to live, learn, work and play in. Welcome to the Clima podcast. In this episode, I speak to Mark Anderson. Mark runs a building company in Wanaka, specialising in building passive and high-performance homes. He grew up around building sites as a young boy, as his father was a builder by trade, so it was only natural for Mark to follow in his footsteps after graduating his carpentry studies. Right, well, welcome on the podcast today, Mark. How are you doing?
Going really, really good today. Lovely bluebird day in Wanaka as it's been for the last few weeks, so good to get in here and have a chat.
Yeah. Great to have you on board here today. Now, Mark, did you grow up in Wanaka?
Did not grow up in Wanaka. I grew up in Dunedin. So for people that don't know, it's about 3 hours sort of east. So I was on the east coast of the South Island and spent 30 years there. Enjoyed it, but always came to Central Otago for holidays and visiting family. And then my wife and I used to think, why are we going home for in the middle of summer when it might be 30 degrees here and 15 degrees in Dunedin, and this is our 10th year here now, and we bit the bullet and moved up here, and yeah, this is now home. I'm not sure if I will ever leave. I'm not sure.
Such a beautiful place. Why would you want to? Eh?
Yeah, it's got everything.
Now, going back a little bit in time, when you were growing up, did you always know that you wanted to be a builder?
It's a funny sort of story that my dad was a builder. My grandparents were farmers, but yeah, Dad was a builder, and born in 86, so in the 90s, I spent a lot of time on his building sites growing up, before health and safety and that. I can still remember climbing 6, 7, 8-story scaffolding, running around like a monkey. And I guess I was always interested. I always enjoyed woodwork at school, but I also never wanted to be a builder. And I'm not sure if that was because Dad was a builder or whatever, but I never wanted to be a builder. I left school. I went landscaping for one of Dad's friends, and then it sort of just fell into place. I managed to get a spot into Otago Polytechnic's building course really late in the piece. A guide pulled out and they offered me a spot, and I took it, and I suppose you never look back.
Yeah. What was your apprenticeship like? What did you learn, and what did you think about what these guys were teaching you at the time? Apprenticeship
was amazing. I was actually with my dad's company, and that was pretty cool just to be working sometimes alongside him, and if not alongside him, he could actually, still in contact with what I was up to. Still learned a lot from him as well. Over the years, giving him a hand here and there. Yeah, I had a pretty fortunate apprenticeship. I built a lot of top-end homes, and I sort of stuck with one foreman really for most of that apprenticeship, so sort of 3 or 4 years, and we just built nice home after nice home after nice home, and it gave me a good solid foundation. And then as soon as I finished my apprenticeship, I did roll into being a foreman straight away, and I've always been a bit of a leader, always been sort of captains of sport teams and things like that. I always wanted to be in charge, I suppose. Maybe why I own my business now. And that I had to learn more skills, and you go from being an apprentice and just getting told what to do to then having to make decisions and book subbies and all that kind of stuff. So I learned a whole other skill set there in the next sort of 3 years. And then I just started to not enjoy a little bit of the culture there as I was sort of getting a bit older. And what ended up happening, I had too much cash work or perky work in the weekend, to be honest, and couldn't quite keep up with it. So I just thought, I was 27, I thought, I'll bugger this, let's have a go, pretty much. And started NMA building there and then, and took on a few jobs, and then fought pretty hard, especially those first few years to get work in and prove yourself and grow a company. And to what I know now, and what we do now compared to what we do back then is quite incredible. Like, my marketing story is great because when I first started that business, I was marketing fish and chip shops and in papers and, like the old school marketing. It's 11 years ago now versus what I do now over the social media. I've got a marketing lady who does it all for me, and the investment's 40-fold compared to what we used to have. And to look back, it's empowering when times get tough to look back and go, you've either been through that or it's been worse or something like that, or look how much you've grown. Look what you're doing now. And I mean, even this podcast, right? Never would have done this 11 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. I mean, if I think back in my life, when I was growing up, I was always crazy about this idea of being on TV or having a radio show or something. Who would have guessed that you could actually do it years ago, eh?
I know. Yeah, so still learned a lot from that company. I learned a lot of good things, and also learned a lot of things that I didn't want in my own company, and that was something I've taken forward still to this day of building good culture is so important. And I'm pretty fortunate at the moment to have a great group of guys who are helping establish that and cement that even better than it's ever been.
So talking about that culture, I was going to ask you this question later, but while we're talking about your guys, if I was a young guy coming to work with you, what are those values that you're looking for in an employee?
Yeah, we just landed on some of these last year, actually. So honesty is big for me. It's my main one. So, if you make a mistake, you just own it. No one's ever in trouble with me. It's a learning experience. Showing up, especially if you're a young guy, I can't teach energy. I can't teach someone who wants to be there on time and when they're there, they're energetic and they're walking around with a bit of purpose and a bit of pace. I can't teach habits like leaving your phone in the smoker shed and just stuff like that. I can't teach that. So that's what I say to young guys, what do you need? Or even guys that are starting, I just say, we can teach you all this, especially all the new techniques that we know now with construction, but we can teach you all that, but I can't teach you how to act and behave. That's got to come from you. And if you want it, you need to show me you want it. But yeah, strong values around honesty, respecting each other, how we communicate's a real big one on our building sites. And we're changing a lot of how building sites were perceived many years ago around our culture and how we speak to each other. As I say, no one's ever in trouble, but we will hold you to a standard, and we hold each other to a little bit of integrity, self-integrity, and the guys actually do it to me because it's a two-way street. Like, we set these values and it's a company value. If I'm not maybe doing X, Y, and Z, they'll pull me up. They're like, hey, boss, you're not, remember you said, remember we said, sorry, it's a we thing. But so that's always great too, so they know that they can. It does mean that if something does happen, we can just be like, we're falling back to something. We can say, remember this is what we are aspiring to and wanting to achieve, and we're not quite getting there with this. And hopefully that helps to break down a bit of stigma and just allow people not to feel attacked and get their back up and get defensive. We can look at it like a learning experience.
Totally. Now, while we're talking about values that you're looking for in others, what are the values that you've grown up with and that you feel that is making a difference in your life and in your business?
Absolutely. Like Dad cemented a lot of that, and he was always respected other people, and seeing how he dealt with people, he was always honest, and that's one of my biggest ones. And sometimes to a fault, almost too honest in business. Like, sometimes things maybe don't need to be said, but it just gets said. Respect, honesty are two of the biggest ones for me, and they definitely impact in business because it's respecting. It's not only respecting, say, the clients or our sub-trades or our staff, but it's also things like respecting the build. It's a big thing for someone to invest in, a big responsibility that we have to build these houses for people, and how we respect the building, whether that's materials or how we look after it in the weather, or even how we look after our community while we're building it. Thinking about neighbours and not letting our rubbish fly around and maybe not being noisy and things like that. So you can have this word that's respect, but when we actually start breaking it down as a staff and as a team, we start getting all these layers underneath it that are like, because what does it actually mean? It's great to have a word, but what does it mean? Oh, it actually means all this other stuff. So it's quite empowering when you actually start to break down what those values are.
And you were talking earlier about the fact that you were working on these high-end buildings while you were in your apprenticeship and things. When did you first get an idea that you wanted to build something that not only looked beautiful, but actually that had good performance and, was improving the health and the comfort of the people living in it? Where did you start with that, Mark?
Once I started changing. My wife and I started to think about how we were living, so food, exercise, mental health work, or self-help, learning and understanding who we were as people. And so I had these three facets I was improving in, and then I was like, what sort of next? And I ended up building a house with the Intello wrap on it, designed by a company in Wellington. We built it, and that sparked interest. Like, what is this stuff? And what does it do? What is it? It was new to me. It was about 6 years ago, and I was like, what's this? I've been building for 15 or 16 years, never come across it. This is new. So that started to spark a bit of interest. And then I was looking for maybe a healthier building to live in. And I spoke to a couple of architects who design these houses called Passive House. And they said, you do the course and we will look at working with you. And I thought, well, what's this? So I started looking a bit more and looking a bit. It still took me a couple of years to actually commit to going down the line and actually doing the course. So it still took a long time for me to, I guess, fold over and go, oh, actually this is starting to make a bit of sense. And you do a little bit of YouTube research, and I've been part of the Better Building Working Group in Wanaka, which is an amazing group of individuals who are looking at three things mainly, but better building is one, how we build and what we build out of. Two is our waste management, and three is our mental health and the construction industry, which a lot of us now know is not overly great. Being part of that group, which started 7 years ago, you start to ask more questions, and that I joined it for the waste management and the mental health side of it. But then you start going, oh, there's other ways to build. And then once I did the course, Passive House course, COVID hit, couldn't actually get my certificate because I couldn't do the exam for family reasons. And then it took me another 2 years. I did the course again because it'd been 2 years, and I was like, I can't sit the exam without maybe redoing the course again. So I did the course again, which is great because I learned probably more on the second time than I did the first. And then, got the exam done. We landed a Passive House job. End of 2022, I think it was, we started it. Yeah, it was pretty scary. I'm not going to lie. It was like, this has probably ramped up the importance again on building a house. It was like, man, I don't want to stuff this up. So there was a wee bit of fear there to start with, but we just broke down the process and again did research and looked a bit deeper into, watched a lot of YouTube clips on how to do things and talked to our subcontractors about, when they need to come in and how we're going to bring cables in and pipes in and ducts in and all this kind of stuff, and had a really good relationship with the architect who helped a lot as well. And it actually wasn't that hard, which is a really, if guys came to me now and said, I've got this job, but, I'm a bit worried about it, just relax on it. Like, it's literally just going through the process. There might be 2 or 3 or 4 other steps in there that you need to nail, but it's still just building 101. It's still level, square, plumb, straight, and add in a few new techniques, and away you're laughing, really, and follow the plans. But a lot of the time, the architects have gone into a lot of detail in these houses to make it pretty clear and obvious what we've got to do.
What would have been the biggest challenge that you faced building that passive house?
Windows. Yeah, so the windows came from Germany, so that was a big learning curve. Even just the install of them, so they're so heavy, like the sliding doors are 300 kilo. So
wow.
Yeah, and we had a 600 mil high foundation, so we're not lifting those into place with lots of men. So we managed to problem solve that by getting a glass sucker and a high-ab. So all those got high-abbed in, which is not your normal. The Intello was, and the airtight wraps it wasn't a challenge, but it was really fun. And the challenge was, how do we do it as best as we can? So I'm really passionate now about tweaking the system and working on how we can install things as efficiently as possible with as less amount of waste as possible. And I had a few ideas, and we threw those ideas into this house, and we got a great blower door score at the end of it, which sort of cemented a lot of those thoughts that I'd had around how to do things, which was cool. But there weren't a huge amount of challenges. I mean, the subcontractors' work was a bit of a challenge, and that was just because it was the first time for a lot of us. But now we're on house sort of 3, 4, and 5. They're a lot more skilled up, and they need a lot less input from us as builders to help them in their roles. So, yeah, that was a few of the challenges.
Now, there's a lot of talk at the moment about the cost of building, and obviously we're talking about building passive house, or at least, energy efficient buildings. And people would push back and say, well, in these times, why would we be building? When we spoke before, you were talking about some of the ways that you've found to actually manage those costs. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of work with clients up front. It's probably become one of my main roles around where they're spending their money. helping them understand very clearly where all that money's going. And we're working towards establishing things like, say if we've got a wall frame, we've reduced all our framing by, say, 30%. So we've got less corners, we've got no dwangs. So we've just got big open pockets, for example. The savings of wood and then your framing costs can be transferred, say, to the extra 2 battens that need to go inside and outside for our air tightness cavity and externally for our structural cavity. So those offset costs can go to those 2 items. The install of the insulation is far quicker because you're not cutting every, say if you're doing a cedar siding or something like that, you got dwangs at 480 centres. So you're cutting and you're cutting and you're cutting and you're cutting. Every square gets cut, whereas we can insulate a house. I haven't quantified it yet, but I feel like we can do it a whole lot quicker with a whole lot less waste as well. That's another big thing. So that's one little area. Yes, we're going to have more costs in there because we can't add in costs like a ventilation system or, say, an airtight vapor control barrier or more insulation or better windows. We can't add all that in for the same cost as, say, a standard house because there's more of those products. But if we can come up with efficiencies like with our airtight membranes, say if we've got a big long wall with, say, 4 interjoining walls internally, instead of stopping and starting at all those internal wall junctions, we just run a big long sheet in behind it. And that saves a whole lot of taping. It just goes corner to corner. There's less chances of air leaks and it's really, really efficient. So that's a little wee change in, say, maybe how the instructions are. Doesn't make it better or worse. It's just a system that we've created. We're always looking at tweaking, especially around framing. We're always looking at removing framing. Like, do we need that? I'm always asking, do we actually need that? So internal frames, for example, we've knocked that down to a single top plate because we've normally got drop ceilings. So we don't need a double top plate and then another drop ceiling dwang line. It helps with our ducting to run through and all sorts of things. So we're always looking at how we can help our subcontractors run their pipe work and run their ducting. I was actually on site this morning and the boys were like, well, if we leave that bay open in our ceiling joists and we leave that bay open there, they can run their ducts around the corner. They don't have to come in and chop timber out later on. So, yeah, and it's not just me, it's the boys on site. They're all thinking. One of the ideas come up the other day is if you've got a hallway, we've got a hallway on a current build with about 3 or 4 sort of cupboards and ins and outs on it, and we did our starter strips on our top plates for our air tightness, but then you've got little squares going into those little hallway areas and that. So my apprentice actually said, why don't we just roll a big 900 wide starter strip across the whole, or just even a 1350 wide starter strip. It does mean we've got to insulate our roof space before we put the roof on, but that saves a bit of time later on with some great products from Clima that we use on our roof membranes. They're watertight anyway, so if we do insulate and then paper above and then roof later on, it's all watertight anyway, so the insulation is protected, and it's just another way of going, well, absolutely, let's roll it one length out. So there's a bit of work there around succession planning and what needs to come before the horse or the cart, I suppose.
Totally. Now, maybe you can solve this problem for me. I'm from South Africa, as you've probably guessed, and I'm still trying to work out why it is you guys call them dwangs and we call them nogs up here in the North Island.
No, don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I can't. All I know is we don't need them anymore.
There we go.
Get rid of them. They're just not required. And when you look into the literature on it, so we used to have sarking. If you rip apart an old house, 100 years old, like I've done in Dunedin quite a few times, you won't find any dwangs. It had sarking inside and out. And now we go and put plywood on the outside of our houses most of the time, a rigid rab board or something similar. It's doing the same thing. So the dwang came along to hold on our cladding. So with the invention of the structural cavity batten, which does the same thing, you all of a sudden don't need your dwangs again. And that reduces a whole lot of things, like I've talked into, when you start doing research and some great stuff around wall framing online. And when you're looking at, say, a wall that's supposed to be an R4.1 in Wanaka, you actually go and look into that a bit more and you put a window in it and you put, say, 50 or 60, 70% of framing in it. All of a sudden that wall's actually working in the R1s potentially. And that's when I say to clients, do you know what you're actually getting? Because I think a lot of people think, I'm getting an R4.1 wall. No. You're actually getting whereas ours might not be an R1, but it might be in the R2s or an R3. because we've reduced that framing, because we're looking at the type of glass, the type of window that we're using, the type of insulation that we're using. We really look into every specification of what's going in.
Now, you've got 3 levels of homes in the way of energy efficiency that you're offering. How do those work? What do those levels stand for?
This came about because I had a couple of potential clients come to me and say, I'm not sure if you can build our house. And I was like, oh, why is that? And they said, well, we're not building a passive house. And I marketed so hard down one line that I sort of really pigeonholed ourselves into it. And that's the goal, still is the goal, to just be building passive house. That's the bigger mission for our company. But I said, well, what are you doing? They said, well, air tightness, we want really good windows and good insulation, and we've got a ventilation system. And I thought, I'll build that house for sure. Like they're ticking a lot of the markers that I want to be building, And so it sort of sparked me to create a tier system. So to break it down so people can look at it and go, I want that. What does it mean? I want that. I want that. So tier 1 is, and off the back of this, I put a couple of markers down ready. So MO Building won't build another standard code home. And so tier 1 is like a vapor control, barriered, airtight home with a ventilation system, thermally reduced framing system. So framing like we're talking about, no dwangs, no corners, things like that, allowing better insulation. It'll have a good slab system in it. So that's tier 1. That's normally getting sort of between 60 and 70% energy reduction compared to a standard code house. Tier 2 is low energy passive house. So you've got to hit those markers. And then tier 3 is standard passive house. So that sort of allows people to go, I want that. And tier 1 to tier 2, a lot of the times the big difference in there is maybe form. So the style of the house could impact that, or a lot of the time it's the windows and whether people want to invest in the better quality windows to get them closer to that marker and some of those markers in there. And the other marker that we laid down, or the peg we put in the ground of, and this come off some experience with clients, was I can't tell you how your house is going to work. And unfortunately in this country, people are doing great things or think they're doing some great things, but they're not energy modelling, or they're not actually going in and finding out how this house is going to work. So they stuff it full of insulation, or they stuff it full of glass or air tightness or all this stuff. And then all of a sudden the house is 50, 40, 45, 50 degrees in summer and people can't live in it. And they're having to retrofit and undo those systems, which I think puts a bit of a black mark on performance or energy efficient housing, versus if we energy model them, or we look into how they are going to work, we know how they're going to work. So I'll put a stake in the ground that if you build with us, you've got to build to one of our tier systems and you've got an energy model, so I can tell you that you're going to get what you're going to get. And off the back of that, we can make so many informed decisions off the back of it. We may not need the level of insulation that the code says we need to achieve a really high-performing home, for example. Throw that out there.
Exactly. I mean, and I think that's where it's come back, where MBI is actually looking at changing again this whole H1, because they've seen, well, the schedule method is not really working, is it?
No. And that's the great thing with Passive House. It can be built, well, the Passive House planning package, which is the software that is used to tell us how these houses are going to work. You can build a house in the desert. It might be paper-thin walls with heaps of shading and things like that, or you can build a house in Antarctica. You might have metre-thick walls and not much glass and, things like that, but you can actually build it anywhere and it's fit for purpose for the area, the location. The great thing the government have done is they've zoned our country a lot better. That is one good thing that came out of H1 that I saw, because the zones were quite big. And what the energy modelling tells me, because every house is so different, so different, and the energy demand on them, and a lot of that can be orientation based. If you're getting a lot of north sun, or you're actually quite south facing, or you're 2-story, or you this big sprawling house and things like that, and all has an impact on how the house is going to work and perform. And we can look into, I was looking at the house holistically a little bit. So you're looking at how it's all going to work together, but then also looking at the individual elements. So the government's kind of going, what's easy? Well, I think this is what they've done. Oh, we can throw heaps of insulation in the ceiling space because there's heaps of room up there, and that'll double the R value of the ceiling. Oh, yeah, we can probably make those frames 140. That's pretty easy because then we can put a number on that, so that gives you an R 4.1. And they've picked on things that are easy, which I understand they need to do. We can't sweep the blanket in one hit. Well, we could, but I think that would put a bit of strain on the industry. But Someone asked me recently, like, what could they look at doing? Or what I said is I'd love for, and modelling maybe to come standard, because it would tell us where to better invest our money and how to build our houses. But I would love for them just to look a bit further afield, look overseas, look at similar climates, and look at how those countries have established their houses and what they do, and how they, instead of having to create our own model, because there's already a model there that's working. But for whatever reason, someone said at a talk last night that the building code's only been around since 1992. So it's not that old, but we've tweaked it how many times? We've had leaky homes. And there's a concern at the moment that we may have mouldy homes. Probably do have mouldy homes because we've stuffed them full of insulation. We haven't controlled the moisture internally. We've created more moisture internally. And then we put a rigid rab on the outside, and the house can't breathe as well as it used to. It was almost better having a house in the 60s than it is in the 2020s nowadays. And the old builders, this is what they used to say actually, talking back to my apprenticeship, they're like, we don't know why we're putting this foam around the windows and, doing all this stuff. They're like, the house needs to breathe. And in your mind, you're like, breathe, yeah, but that's just letting cold air in. Like, that's ridiculous. But they had a point, right?
Exactly. Now, over the past couple of years that you've been building these higher performance buildings, are there any specific builds that stand out for you that you can tell us a bit about?
They're all pretty amazing because they all work. And the current one we're actually doing, we're waiting on our windows to turn up. So we've kind of put some plastic over the windows and taped them all up. And we've done our Intello internally, and it's all sealed up. And we're probably only 80% airtight, but you can already feel a difference. Like you come in, our mornings are 3 degrees here this morning in Wanaka, so autumn's just turned like a switch. Like on the 1st of March, it literally went from 17-degree mornings to 3-degree mornings. It was quite incredible. And you step inside this thing, and we've got all the insulation in, and it's already starting to almost work, and it's got no windows in it. It's quite incredible. But a Tier 1 house we built last year was 180 square metres. I love this story because we energy modelled it. We had designed in an underfloor heating system, which is sort of costing $45,000, something like that. And the energy modeller, Arthur Lee, said, we don't need that. Once we did the model, we were like, what do you mean you don't need it? He's like, you're just not going to need it. It's just going to be turbo overkill. So that turned into a 6 kilowatt heat pump for the whole house, plus a couple of kilowatt heaters. They turned into air tightness and a ventilation system and a better MaxRaft slab, which taught me a big lesson. And those three elements, so the air tightness, the ventilation, and the heating, cost the same as the underfloor heating system. So we literally just flipped that money over from going into a heating system that's going to cost you $800 to $1,000 a month to run. And then to get the feedback from the clients through the winter when they moved in, and they live and work from home. They own a tech company, and they were monitoring it pretty well for me. So their power bills were going from $7 a day if the sun was out to $10 a day if there was no sun in the middle of winter, topping out about $250, $260, $270 a month. Most houses in Wanaka in the middle of winter, you're running at least $700 to $1,000, even more. Some of the big houses I've heard $1,500 to $2,000 a month just to heat them.
That's crazy.
Now that's including all their hot water as well. So they can ask their neighbours. I bet their neighbours will be $600, $700, $800, or a fire's blazing or whatever. And they're 22 degrees across their floor area. They're not 22 in the lounge and then 12 in the bedrooms. They're 22 across the whole thing.
Isn't that amazing?
They've got a young son who's comfortable. He's living in there. It's beautiful, and that's a big drive for us to try and put more kids into better homes. Yeah, it's amazing feedback. And then the summer hit, right? So we had a beautiful summer, 6-7 weeks of 30, 31, 32 degrees straight. Now, we've got to be really, really careful in how we build these houses. So when a really good architect said to me, it's really, really easy to make them warm. It's really, really hard to keep them cool. So this was a really good design. It had great eaves, not much west glass. They text me in the middle of summer. We've just hit 26 degrees for the first time. We've just turned the heat pump on just to drop it down. So again, that's a big role of mine, is talking to clients about keeping them warm, but also keeping them cool. And that's, again, where the energy modelling can help us with that as well. And we've got to start looking at external shading and eave sizes. And the next one we're about to build, they actually went into the specifics on the glass. So if we use this type of glass, it'll block out this much, but we'll gain this much. So it was sort of the balance of not too much, but just enough. And that was another good learning. And every house is teaching me Heaps, man. So much.
You talk a lot about community, Mark. What are your connections in the community at the moment? What are you doing for people?
Yeah, the Better Building Group's a big one. So that's part of a subsidiary called WOW, We Are One, run by an amazing group of people. And we catch up every 6 weeks, and they're making a big impact, and they're getting more grants, which is having more impact. I'd probably show up as a voice and an advocator and someone on site more than someone that gets it and does something. But we also host events. I do a lot of talks, especially around our waste management for that. I do breakfast talks at a merchant or whatever about what we're doing with our waste management, which is a big piece for us. And then last year we did a talk on, I guess the goal was to dumb down performance housing. And what is performance housing? You see a lot of it coined in real estate and stuff. I'm selling this passive house, and you sort of go around and you have a look at it and you're like, that's not a passive house. It might have great solar gain, which in the winter's great and summer's too much, like I talked into, but it's not a passive house. So I just want to get some clarity on what these levels are. And if you've insulated your house really, really well, it's not a passive house, but it could be, you could speak to it being, say, a really well insulated home above code level of this. So it's trying to find some tiers or some levels and dumb this down to people so they actually know what they're buying. I know around the world they have star systems or rating systems or number systems to say what the level of the house is, which could be something that could be brought in here. But that was, I did that talk with an architect, a real estate agent actually, and Catherine from Clima. So it was multifaceted, and we had about 60 people turn up, which is amazing. So that's sort of a couple of the aspects of the community. And Wanaka's got an amazing community. It's one of the best things about living here. They're very connected and wanting to do a lot for nature and the environment.
Now, you talk a lot about waste and saving waste going into landfill. What are some of the measures you're doing to improve that?
So we track it all. The last few jobs we've tracked, and you realise how much, one, money you've saved, and two, how many less skips we're using. So we've got, thanks to a couple of great companies locally who have given us the access to recycle. Recycle needs to be the second step. First step would be designing out or ordering a little bit better, or looking at not creating the waste to start with. But if you are creating the waste, we're building. It's an impossible feat, I think, to be zero building waste, in my opinion. And it's just what we do with it. So we've got our cardboard, we've got our plastics, we've got metal, we've got polystyrene, jibboard, we've now got pallets. So there's 6 items straight off the list that we're recycling. The boys are now starting to recycle batteries, glass from cans, single-use cups for coffees. If I'm buying the boys coffees, I've got mugs. We've got reused mugs and things like that. I try and use those. And the boys are just continuing to lead that on site, which is amazing. And there's still waste. A big component of our skips are wood. So there's a big piece there. I'm working just last week, started talking to Marley Plumbing about our PVC pipes, because they do a lot of recycling around the country, but it's where you need to get a central hub for Central Otago and how we get it back. So that's a big part of the Better Building Group, advocating for that as well. And like Dulux, they do paint and paint pots. So it's actually when you dig a little bit deeper, you start realising, like Terralana Insulation, the wall insulation at Christchurch, they take all their offcuts and they recycle, refurb, they make all sorts of different things out of them. They take all their plastic bags. As builders, we get a lot of stuff turning up on our sites, pallets and strapping and plastic wrapping. And if we can push it up the hill a bit so it actually doesn't get to us, that's ideal. Or we can push it back on them and go, look, we're going to buy your product, but we want you to take our waste and recycle it, go and do something with it. And if we can band together as a community like we are sort of in Wanaka, I'm seeing way more. It's amazing to see the uptake of the recycling bins and some of the effort that we've been putting in with the Better Building Group starting to have an impact. It's amazing to see. And it's awesome to see builders wanting to take it on because, yeah, she's a pretty decent problem.
Yeah.
I think the stat last night was 50 to 60% of New Zealand's waste comes from construction and demolition waste.
Wow. That's a big number.
And I'm pushing back on Clima as well. So, it's about asking. And the team at Clima are great. I know they've got one of their products now with the recycled backing. And if we keep asking and keep pushing and keep asking, keep pushing, and don't give up, I'm like a dog with a bone half the time. Sometimes my sites get a wee bit piled up with stuff and the boys are like, I'm just asking the question, And what happens if I ask the question, a lot of the time they find someone. They find actually someone for that, either repurpose or recycle, or someone will take it. It's quite interesting how it just does unfold. It's easier just to chuck it in the bin.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the stats last night was 13% of all construction and demolition waste is new product. That ain't good enough, right?
I'm with you there. When we met earlier, you were mentioning that you're selling your house. Tell us about what you're planning to build for yourself.
Yeah, I'd love to, after being in this house for 3 years and designed it pre-COVID. So it's been about a 5 or 6 year journey, I suppose, and I didn't know what I knew then and what I know now. I said to the agent this morning, I'm not sure if I could actually go into an older home. It's quite challenging for me to go into an older home, even though I do see it as a challenge maybe to do an Enerfit refurb on it and bring it up to a passive house sort of refurbishment, because not a lot of them get done. But I'd love to build a lower energy home, looking at our products in a little bit more depth around toxicity, which is a big part of my wife and I's beliefs, whether that's a straw system, whether that's more Terralana wall insulation, whether that's less toxic paints or furnishings or whatever it may be, just to delve down that road a little bit more. And then just to take the house that I built, which was pretty good and started the journey for me to understand how to build a house a little bit better, but just to really amplify that and have it as a place for community a little bit as well. So I can maybe host events, or I can bring people through or show people through it as I build it. We do that a lot, actually, and people love coming to see how we're building these houses. It's really cool to, and it's even a lot of builders I connect with come and they might not take it all, but I know a couple that are taking it a little bit. They're taking the framing techniques and tweaking it to however they might want to do it, but I know it's a little bit better. And if we can do a whole lot, what I call 1%ers, you do 1% here and a 1% there and a 1% there and a 1% there. All of a sudden, these 1%ers can add up and start building a house that's just a little better. They don't have to be passive house. They don't have to be our tier systems, but let's just start thinking about how we actually put stuff in and what products we're using and if we can do things just slightly better.
I'm with you there. Awesome. Mark, thank you very much for your time today. It's been absolutely fantastic catching up. Best of luck with selling your house, and can't wait to see that passive house that you're going to build. Maybe you can build a sort of an Airbnb on the back so people can come and stay in it, because wouldn't that be great? Because my big question is, how do we get this message across to, there's a lot of us all meeting and talking about this, but how do we get this to the average public out in the street that currently believes that because they're building a house to the New Zealand Building Code, that they're going to get something that's comfortable, is not going to overheat in the summer, it's going to be warm and dry in the winter? How do we get that across to these people?
It is a feeling as well. There are some energy cost savings per year. They're not huge, and I say that to people, and it'll take a long time probably to pay the extra cost to build that place, but it is a feeling. You walk into one of these houses and you just know it's been built differently. And one of the greatest stats that I've heard in the last few years is we spend 90% of our life in the inbuilt environment. So we're in a building 90% of our lives, yet most of our buildings in this country are pretty poor. But when you compare a 2020 house to a 1920s house, that 2020 house feels great. But as you say, if more people could get into a better 2020s house, an energy efficient house, then they would feel the difference between a 2020 standard house and a 2020 performance house. And then that might flip. And I guess more of them get built, friends and family come, and I want this. And that actually happened with a build we were about to start. They had a friend build a low energy passive house, and then they went in there and went, oh, man, we got to have this. So that's how we do. We have open days, more talks, more events, more podcasts, more just getting it out to the general public. And I do feel like it's getting out there more. It's great that it's been on Grand Designs a couple of times and people are starting to become a little bit aware about it. But I was on a podcast yesterday and the lady said, I've only just heard about it last week.
Wow.
So,
and that's in Wanaka.
That's in Wanaka. We're pretty, it's a pretty amazing place to be. Well, I think we've probably almost got the most amount of passive houses almost maybe locally in the country. So, yeah, it's a big mission of mine to get it out to the masses and hence why I do a lot of this stuff. It's a big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, and I'm sure I'll chat with you again in the future. Hopefully I can come and see you one of your builds one of these days.
Absolutely. It'd be great to have you down.
Sharing knowledge is at the heart of our strategy to make buildings better for everyone. Sign up for our podcasts to learn more about creating healthy living conditions by protecting building structures from external and internal moisture damage. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to having you with us next time.